the SD card on my Raspberry Pi ran out of space. So I got a bigger one. Hi. Welcome to Can of Spader Christmas. Alright, so I had seen a video about hooking up a solid state hard drive to a Raspberry Pi. Now where, this might be interesting is if you are just burning through SD cards for whatever the application is. I wanted to find out if a solid state drive was a viable option. And so I bought this 32 gig solid state drive off Amazon. It's a Transcend. And then I bought this little adapter, Weemy. So this is just a SATA to USB adapter. It's also got a AC adapter plug in here, so I think USB 3 works fine with just the cable. USB 2 may need the extra power supply. I guess it also depends on what you're plugging it into, what the power supply is running on your device. Now, I'm running Raspberry Pi, so a lot of times when you buy one of those, the power supply that comes with it is just barely enough to run the Pi. And if you start adding peripherals in there, then it kind of has a problem. So now I've got a bigger power supply for mine, so it's not an issue. So that's all it is. It's just a solid state drive, and you're using it as a USB external drive on the Pi. There is a lot of command line stuff to get this to actually work. So with an SD card, you can expand the file system to use the entire SD card. You can't do that with this because it only works with SD cards. So you have to do it manually, and you have to go into Fdisk and delete and create a new partition, and then run a resize command. It's not super complicated, but if you're not comfortable with doing that kind of low-level stuff, then stay away from it. This is not required. This is just something I wanted to play with because I thought it was kind of a neat idea and wanted to check it out. So I'll go through and initialize this on my laptop, and then I'll connect it up to the Raspberry Pi and see, make sure that the Pi boots without an SD card, just with this connected up to it. And then I will expand the file system so that it can use the entire drive. All of that is pretty generic Linux stuff. So any application that you have that you might need this for, that'll still apply. And then the final piece will just be Falken Player, and so that's more specific to my application, but this should apply to anything that does a lot of writes. I'm not saying that you need to do this for Falken Player. I've got SD cards that have lasted for years. It does not chew up SD cards, so you don't need to do this. It's just uber geek stuff. Probably also not going to be supported by the developers of Falken Player, so don't get me in trouble and start asking them a bunch of questions why your solid state hard drive doesn't work with Falken Player. Alright, this cable, it just has the SATA connector and a USB connector. We have a solid state drive here with the same kind of connector. Can you see that? And we just want to match up the short end and the long end. There we go. We're ready to plug it into the computer and format it. So let's erase this. Don't really care what it's called. Master boot record. No, we want FAT. We want untitled FAT and master boot record. We will hit erase. Show details, everything looked good. Okay, we're done. So now we have a FAT32 formatted 32 gigabyte drive. So I'm going to put the Falken Player image onto it. That's a Raspberry Pi image with stretch and some application files for Falken Player. But it's really the same. You could write noobs to it or really whatever you wanted to. Okay, so let's exit out of this, open up Etcher. Select the image. Pi 25, select the drive, that's the 32 giger, and we will flash. I'll type and we're flashing. Flash complete. Okay, now we can remove it from the computer and put it into the Raspberry Pi. Okay, this is the setup. I have the solid state drive here, cable coming out here, going back into here. I have no SD card in there. I've got an Ethernet cable plugged in, HDMI plugged in, and then this is the power connector. So if we power up the unit and everything works, what you'll see is this little light will come on, the light right there. The hard drive light will come on, but we don't see anything. This is a Pi 3B, not a Pi 3B Plus. So we've got to put an SD card in there, get into the operating system, and make one little change. Let me get set up for that and I'll show you that. So the setup is we have a Raspberry Pi booted up into Stretch with the SD card. We also have the solid state drive plugged into the USB port. Doesn't really matter at this point, but it's in there. So what we're going to do is execute this command. It's echo program USB boot mode equals 1, and we're going to add that to the boot config. So if you do that, so this we should find in the boot config, and let's do a cat boot config, and there it is at the bottom, program USB boot mode equals 1. The Raspberry Pi 3B Plus is able to boot from USB without any changes, but the Raspberry Pi 3B requires the USB boot bit to be set in the one-time programmable memory. So this is a commitment, folks. You can't go back. Once you do this, you can't go back. And all it means is that if you have a bootable USB drive in there and no SD card, then it'll boot from the USB drive. If you have an SD card in there, that still takes priority and that will still boot. All right, so let's reboot and let's fry that fuse. Okay, we have rebooted. Now we need to execute this command to make sure that it did its job, and it's vcgen command or cmd otp underscore dump. Pipe that to grep 17 and we get 3020000A, which means that the bit is now set. So now we should be able to shut down this Pi, pull out the SD card, and boot from the SSD if all goes well. So now, and we can shut down. I will pull out the SD card and put it aside. So we have no SD card. All we got is this SSD plugged into the Pi. All right, so now let's fire it back up and see if it works. Hey, that looks good. And it looks like we're booting. So we just powered off. Let's put the SD card back in because we do want to boot with that, but we also want this connected this time because we're going to expand this file system. So power on. So execute lsblk to get all the block devices. So you see we have, we're booted from this disk, which is the SD card, and then this is the hard drive that we have plugged in. And just to verify that, it's partitioned it with a 43.8 meg boot partition and then a 3 gig drive partition. So we want to increase this to close to 32 gig. We do a sudo fdisk sda, and there we are. So if we print the current partition, We have this fat partition, which is not really sure what that is. Maybe that's a bootloader. And then this is the one we want to change. So the first thing we want to do is delete this second partition. I know it sounds scary. So we deleted it. So we do a new primary, and we're going to default to 2. The first sector, let's just copy this, 98,304, 98,304. And the last one is going to be whatever the last one is. So this drive has 62, 533, 296 sectors, and 62, 533, 295 is the last sector. So we'll just hit enter. We created a second partition. It'll be ext4. Yes, no, we don't want to remove the signature. And then we need to write this partition table. So now we need to reboot it. All right, let's do an ls block again just to verify. It's 29.8 gig now, so we want to resize fs dev sda2. And yeah, I bet I need to do this. Okay. There we go. It will take a few minutes while it's resizing. The hard drive light is blinking. All right. So now we should be able to shut down. I want to halt it. Let me remove the SD card. So now we just have this. Let's turn it back on. Now let's see if she boots with the SSD fully resized. So if I hit that with a browser, it looks like it is working. So now we can go in and configure Falken just like we do normally when we're using an SD card. That's awesome. So I did a quick performance test. Coming in at the slowest was a thumb drive at 2 minutes and 28 seconds. Then the SSD at 2 minutes and 9 seconds. And then, not surprising, the SD card at 1 minute 46 seconds. Okay, so it works. I'm happy that I had a little experiment that came out on the positive side. I'm going to run this for a while. I'm just going to basically just have it run a show for a while and see how that does. I'll also be updating the sequences and adding songs and that kind of stuff. But mainly just having it run and see what it does, see if it runs into any issues. So I'll let you know how that goes. In the articles that I was looking at, there may be some compatibility issues with some solid-state drives. Some of them may not come up fast enough for the Raspberry Pi to recognize them. There may be some other issues that I don't know about. I don't know if I just got lucky with this or if it's, works better now. Not really sure. This one I tried and this one worked. So I will have a link to this on my Amazon page. I'll also link to this adapter on my Amazon page. And if it's something you want to try out, these worked for me. I'm not an expert in this. I haven't, this is what I've tried. So this works for me. I won't be much help if you have questions about other solid state drives. So, but if you want to try it out, I think it's kind of a cool idea. That being said, if you have any questions, leave them below. Other than that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.